Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. Donald Trump's speech to the Value Voters Summit here in the nation's capital seemed very well received, judging by the audience reaction. The Republican nominee promised that his administration will cherish, protect, and defend the country's Christian heritage. Meanwhile, Trump is being criticized for his praise of the leader of a nation with a much different heritage. Chief political correspondent Carl Cameron is with the Trump campaign tonight here in Washington.
Your values of love, charity, and faith built this nation.
At the Conservative Values Voters Summit in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump made no mention of the growing controversy over his latest remarks on Russian cable TV. After again praising Russian President Vladimir Putin on primetime national TV Wednesday, Trump did a phone interview with Larry King that appeared yesterday on the Russia Today network known in this country as RT America, which is basically directed by Moscow, and he cast doubt on the U.S. government's assertion that the Russian government and associated hackers are trying to undermine the U.S. election.
I think it's probably unlikely. I think maybe the Democrats are putting that out. Who knows? But I think that it's pretty unlikely.
During the interview, Trump slammed the most free press in the world on a network controlled by the Kremlin.
But there's tremendous dishonesty with the media. Not all of it, obviously, but tremendous dishonesty.
Trump then openly criticized both former President George W. Bush and President Obama's Iraq policies on the Russian satellite and cable channel.
We should have never gone into Iraq, okay, period. And the way they got out really caused ISIS. You think about it.
Trump's aides say they thought the interview was for Larry King's podcast and didn't know it would air on the Russian network King's worked for since 2013. Trump's repeatedly expressed admiration for the Russian president stands in stark contrast to harsh criticism from Republicans and President Obama for Russia's annexation of Crimea in violation of Ukraine's sovereignty.
I'm not confident that we can trust the Russians and Vladimir Putin.
But the Obama administration began with a push to reset U.S.-Russian relations. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton led the effort, which went off the rails at the start when a photo op with a toy reset button was mislabeled with the Russian word for overcharged.
You did this wrong.
I got it wrong.
House Speaker Paul Ryan in a statement said, quote, Putin is an aggressor who does not share our interests. Trump's exchange of compliments through the press with Putin doesn't sit well with foreign policy experts either.
I think one has to be a little careful to let flattery affect one's judgment.
Running mate Mike Pence is defending Trump's view of Putin.
I think it's inarguable that Vladimir Putin has been a stronger leader in his country than Barack Obama has been in this country.
Trump this week suggested North Korea would be China's problem, not the U.S.'s, if he becomes president. And he blamed North Korea's latest nuclear weapons test on Clinton.
It was announced that North Korea performed its 5th nuclear test, its 4th since Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State. It's just one more massive failure from a failed Secretary of State.
Trump tonight heads to conservative Pensacola, Florida for a rally. It's an area with a big concentration of military, something he's been concentrating on this week himself. And then tomorrow he'll attend funeral services for Phyllis Schlafly, the conservative icon who passed away earlier this week in St. Louis, Missouri. Brett?
Carl Cameron here in Washington. Carl, thanks. As Hillary Clinton tried today to pump up her foreign policy and national security credentials in the midst of another serious foreign policy challenge for her old boss, her campaign is once again being accused of hypocrisy and playing the race card. Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin is with the Clinton campaign tonight in New York.
The meeting with a bipartisan group of Republican and Democratic former national security advisors was planned before North Korea carried out a 5th nuclear test, its 2nd in a year. Secretary Clinton spoke to reporters after what was designed to look like a meeting in the Situation Room.
I'm not waiting until November. I'm bringing Democrats and Republicans together now because I plan to get right down to work on day one.
Running mate Tim Kaine visited Birmingham, Alabama, and a potent symbol of the civil rights movement, the 16th Street Baptist Church, which was bombed in 1963, killing 4 young girls among the churchgoers. Clinton reminded the group of Baptists about what her opponent has said about President Obama.
Who traffics in toxic conspiracy theories like the lie that President Obama is not a true American.
This as her husband delivered a blistering attack on Donald Trump in Orlando, Florida, another battleground.
That message, I'll give you America Great Again, is if you're a white Southerner, you know exactly what it means, don't you?
Bill Clinton seems to have forgotten when he, a Midwestern Southern Baptist, favored the very same phrase when he was running for president.
Together we can make America great again. And make America great again economically, educationally, and socially.
Both candidates have taken to accusing the other of racism and bigotry.
I'd say you can take Trump supporters and put them in two big baskets. There are what I call the deplorables, the racists and the haters.
Hillary Clinton is a bigot who sees people of color only as votes.
But the two families were not always enemies. In fact, the Clinton Library responded to a FOIA request today, releasing photos showing Bill Clinton and Donald Trump in 2000 looking rather chummy at the Trump Tower with Melania and a former model who was Trump's girlfriend. Politics makes strange bedfellows. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin with the Clinton campaign. Jennifer, thank you. Attorneys for the parents of two of the men killed during the Benghazi terror attacks are asking a judge for a default judgment against Hillary Clinton. The parents of Tyrone Woods and Sean Smith are suing Clinton for wrongful death, defamation, and other charges. They say she failed to respond to their lawsuit. No comment yet from the Clinton team. Tune in Sunday night, 8 p.m. for a live special report. I'll be speaking with the former chairman of the House Select Committee on Benghazi, Trey Gowdy, on the 9/11 anniversary and the anniversary of the Benghazi attacks. Special report is going 6 days a week until the election. 5 women and 2 men have been arrested for allegedly planning an attack near the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Amateur video appears to show police arresting a 19-year-old suspect. Several gas canisters were found in a vehicle near the cathedral earlier this week. A Paris prosecutor says the women were radicalized by the Islamic State. A terror attack spearheaded by women would mark a new step in the ISIS campaign. Dozens of tourists were rescued today after being trapped overnight in cable cars dangling above the French Alps. The ordeal began Thursday afternoon when cables on the panoramic Mont Blanc cable car service became twisted, trapping 110 people in a string of cars at 3,800 feet in altitude. Many were rescued by helicopter right before dark. 33 others had to spend the night in those cable cars. As mentioned earlier, North Korea is believed to have tested what may be its most powerful nuclear weapon to date. Today, President Obama's defense chief said the international community must redouble the pressure on North Korea to halt its nuclear program. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is monitoring reaction tonight from the State Department.
North Korea's state-run media said the country's second nuclear test this year, its 5th overall, was successful, with scientists having standardized a nuclear warhead that can be mounted on ballistic missiles. In Seoul, South Korea's president, fresh off the phone with President Obama, warned the nuclear threat from the north is real and imminent.
And we should view as out of control the mental status of Kim Jong-un, who refuses to listen to anything from the international community and neighboring countries in order to maintain his power.
Senior Pentagon and State Department officials were also in Seoul, while Secretary of State Kerry was in Geneva trying to negotiate a Syrian ceasefire with Russia's foreign minister.
China, Russia, the United States, everybody shares concerns, but we're trying still to monitor to find out precisely what took place.
We are committed to making sure that the sanctions that we have in place are implemented and enforced.
South Korean defense officials said the blast was the North's largest, with a force equivalent to 10 kilotons of TNT. By comparison, the atomic bomb the United States dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of 15 kilotons. To collect environmental samples for radiation testing, the Pentagon sent a WC-135 surveillance plane to the region, but early assessments suggest the device featured a uranium core, which, if true, would mean the impoverished, heavily sanctioned North is far along on both of the known pathways to a nuclear weapon, uranium and plutonium.
I do not simply understand why they are continuing like this way.
The UN Security Council swiftly scheduled a closed-door emergency session, but the North's patron, China, wields veto power there and only fitfully pressures its client state to curb its nuclear ambitions. Indeed, a top North Korean nuclear official, Cho Son-hui, visited Beijing Wednesday and analysts doubt the test would have gone off if she had received a genuine warning from the Chinese.
The North Koreans, I think, got a big green light. And it also says that the fundamental assumption of American foreign policy towards North Korea is wrong. China is not on our side. China is actively working to help the North Koreans.
Now, we are keeping an eye on that emergency closed-door session of the UN Security Council up in New York. So far, nothing has come from it. The smart money holds that if anything were to come from it, at least today, the most that would be a statement of some measure of severity. As for the imposition of still more sanctions on North Korea, that would take more time if it ever comes to pass. Brett.
James, we're getting breaking news out of Geneva. Secretary Kerry meeting with the Russian counterpart Lavrov, saying that there has been the beginning of a deal being struck on Syria. And we're just getting word as they're just talking about it. I know you don't have details as it's happening, but how significant is that, and what are the questions that remain about the ability to enforce something that is put together in Geneva?
That is the key question, the ability to enforce this, whether the Syrians would stick to it, and frankly, whether the loosely affiliated group that we call the Syrian rebels, which includes some terrorist elements as well, would stick to it. But this is the product of some very intensive negotiations between Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov in Geneva over the past 36 hours or so. At one point, the text went back to capitals, and according to the Russian side of things, they waited 5 hours for the White House to make some kind of decision. Apparently, that has reached Geneva now.
Yeah, we're just getting word from the wires that Secretary Kerry says there is, if there is a sustained reduction in violence, Russia and the U.S. will work together to develop a military plan against the Nusra Front. And we should point out the Nusra Front are the terrorist radicalized elements of on the ground in Syria.
That's right, and in fact, they are a former affiliate of al-Qaeda. So it's going to be a very long road for Syria, even if we do get some cessation of hostilities that allows the humanitarian aid to start flowing once again.
James Rosen at the State Department with breaking news out of Geneva. James, as always, thank you. We'll bring, as we get more developments, we'll bring them here. A Volkswagen engineer is pleading guilty in the automaker's scandal over emissions cheating. The 62-year-old worker was indicted on 2 counts, including violating the Clean Air Act. Volkswagen put software in some of its diesel-powered vehicles, allowing them to evade clean air standards. The cheating scandal has cost the company nearly $15 billion in settlements. A federal judge here in Washington has denied the request for an injunction from a Native American tribe that opposes a huge pipeline project at its North Dakota reservation. Thousands of people have come to that area to protest. A joint statement from the Departments of Justice, Army, and Interior is asking the pipeline company to voluntarily pause work near the disputed lake. The stock market today tumbled to its biggest losses since June over worries that interest rates may be heading higher soon. The Dow dropped 394 points today. The S&P 500 fell 53.5. The Nasdaq lost 134. For the 4-day trading week, the Dow lost about 2 1/5 percentage points. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq were off about 2 1/3. America's election headquarters in depth tonight. Voting for president for most of us happens in 60 days, 59 to be exact, but some of you started voting today. Correspondent Peter Ducey is in Raleigh, North Carolina tonight, where the first early voting ballots in what has become a key swing state are going out.
Trump and Clinton still have 60 days to make their case to residents of swing states, right? Wrong, because thousands of ballots were mailed out today in North Carolina, where 4 years ago, more than 60% of voters made their presidential picks early, and local officials are preparing for more.
So far, we've got 821 requests as for day one to go out. So we see, it looks like that's going to be a little bit higher if the trend were to continue.
The Tar Heel state went for Obama in 2008, then Romney in 2012, even though Democrats had a clear edge by the time the first ballot boxes opened up on Election Day, with Democrats casting 47.6% of early ballots by mail or in person, Republicans only casting 31.5%. That means the GOP candidate may need to play catch-up. Right now, Trump only trails Clinton by a fraction of a point in the Real Clear Politics polling average, but he may have another problem. Governor Pat McCrory is up for re-election here, and he's hurting in the polls after months of controversy over the state's transgender bathroom bill, something Hillary Clinton reminded voters of this week.
Others are not coming to this beautiful state because they don't want to be associated
with the discriminatory, bigoted policies of your governor and legislature.
Now some experts are forecasting a one-of-a-kind political phenomena in this state.
Very often we expect to see the way that the candidate at the top of the ticket performs trickle down and affect the way that candidates below run. But in the case of North Carolina, I expect we will see some of the reverse.
People who cast their ballots early can't change their mind between now and November, which means Trump and Clinton may have already made their final arguments to some North Carolinians. And that's just one of the reasons Republican officials say a 2-month early voting period is a problem.
You know, we have a situation here where you have to be alive on Election Day. If you vote early, you still have to be alive. And that can be in a very close race. You could literally have dead people voting.
17 days of early in-person voting starts soon, and Democrats are calling recent Republican attempts to limit hours at some of these early voting locations an attempt to suppress minority turnout. But the GOP says that is not the case. They are just concerned that starting so early gives people too many chances to cheat the system. Brett?
Peter Ducey, live in Raleigh. Peter, thank you. Louisiana's governor is asking Congress for $2 billion in aid following last month's devastating flooding. A storm that dumped as much as 2 feet of rain in some parts of that state caused almost $9 billion in damage and affected more than 55,000 homes. It's back to school time in Chicago, but for how long remains to be seen. Correspondent Matt Finn reports an impending teacher strike is just one of the many problems facing public school students and parents this fall.
Good morning, good morning. Only a few days back from summer break, and parents in Chicago are already bracing for schools to close again.
It's a little frustrating, you know, because you're wondering, okay, do I have to stay home from work? Everybody's working hard.
About 30,000 members of the Chicago Teachers Union, who have been working without a contract for over a year, warn they will strike by October if they can't reach a new deal with the district. The biggest sticking point, pensions. The cash-strapped Chicago public school system says it can no longer afford to contribute 7% towards teachers' pensions. The union argues the district's pension contribution is something they deserve, not a perk.
Anybody that knows anything about negotiations, whenever you give something up, you don't ever get it back.
Teachers argue they aren't getting much help from the mayor or from the broke state of Illinois that hasn't passed a budget in over a year. The Chicago School District's latest offer includes a 13.5% raise over the life of a teacher's contract, which the district says will offset that pension pickup. A top school official tells Fox, quote, "A strike can be averted, and CPS will work tirelessly to make sure children's education and progress is not interrupted." Outside of the classroom, parents also worry about their children's safety. The month of August was the deadliest in 20 years in Chicago. Year to date, 344 teens were shot, 42 fatally. On a single day in July, 3 children under 11 years old were hit by bullets.
Is he even safe going from the bus to the door? I mean, it's a lot to think about.
Parents and students in America's third largest city are caught in the middle of the Windy City's prickly politics.
We are not going to work another year without a contract.
It's going to be extremely hard if there's a strike.
The Chicago Teachers Union will hold a strike authorization vote later this month, and over 30,000 teachers say they will walk off the job if there's no new deal by October. Brett?
Matt Finn in Chicago. Matt, thank you. Up next, why would President Obama veto legislation allowing 9/11 victims to get financial compensation? We'll explain. He has to make a decision soon. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. WSVN in Miami with public protest over another round of spraying to stop the Zika virus. Mosquito-killing pesticide was dropped this morning over the objections of many in that community. The president of the PTA said she was keeping her child home from school and suggested other parents to do the same. The mayor and the CDC insist the chemical is safe.
What better way to remember 9/11 than with a Twin Tower sale? Where you can get any size mattress.
Fox 26 in Houston with an apology from the owner of this mattress company over this advertisement promoting a 9/11 anniversary sale. Ad shows 2 men asking a woman about a Twin Towers sale. She pushes the men backwards, as you see, into 2 stacks of mattresses. And this is a live look at San Francisco from our affiliate KTVU. The big story there tonight, a $185 million fine for Wells Fargo. The penalty is over bank employees opening millions of unauthorized accounts for their customers in order to meet aggressive sales goals. Roughly 5,300 workers were fired. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Beautiful shot of New York City there. The pressure is on President Obama tonight over a piece of legislation that could eventually lead to money for the families of the 9/11 victims. The administration has signaled a possible veto just 2 days before the 15th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Correspondent Rich Edson reports from the White House tonight on what could be a major confrontation between the president and Congress.
And with that, 2 days before the 15th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, Congress has forced President Obama to decide whether to deny victims' families the right to sue those they hold responsible.
This is vital legislation. I think it'd be foolish to veto this bill or not let it go through. I think he'd do a better service to add his name to all of Congress and the will of the people.
This morning, the House joined the Senate in unanimously approving a bill to allow family members of those killed in the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks to sue Saudi Arabia or any nation or foreign official found responsible for terrorist attacks that kill Americans within the United States. 15 of the 19 9/11 hijackers were Saudi nationals. Victims' families say officials within the Saudi government aided them while they were in the U.S. Saudi Arabia denies those charges.
A government which has protested for so long that it is wholly innocent of any responsibility shouldn't be complaining that it will have to answer to these charges in a court of law.
President Obama argues the bill opens the possibility of Americans routinely suing other governments. He says that could then expose the U.S. government to lawsuits from those in other countries. Two top officials in the administration of George W. Bush agree. His former ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, and Attorney General Michael Mukasey write in the Wall Street Journal that the bill, quote, shifts authority for a huge component of national security from the politically accountable branches, the president and Congress, to the judiciary, the branch least competent to deal with international matters of life and death and least politically accountable. As for whether the president will veto the bill, White House officials point to earlier comments from White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest.
Given the concerns that we have expressed, it's difficult to imagine the president signing this legislation.
If the president vetoes this bill, Congress, with wide bipartisan support for this effort, could vote to override that presidential veto. It would take a 2/3 majority in the House and in the Senate. And if that happens, it would be the first veto override of President Obama's administration. Brett?
And Rich, quickly, I mean, just judging by the voice vote in the House and what we saw in the Senate, they might have those numbers.
There were no on-record objections in the House or in the Senate for this. If they were forced to take a roll call vote, that could happen differently, but there is wide bipartisan support for this.
Okay, Rich Edson live on the North Lawn. Rich, thank you. We're learning tonight that federal agents have disrupted several advanced terror plots to the homeland during the tenure of Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. He spoke exclusively to Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge today in New York as federal workers return to the site of unspeakable tragedy.
15 years after nearly 3,000 Americans were murdered in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the threat is more diverse with the emergence of homegrown terrorists and encrypted communications that make it increasingly difficult for investigators to track.
9/11 was the prime example of a terrorist-directed attack. We now live with the prospect, in addition, of terrorist-inspired attacks, where ISIL, Al-Qaeda, tries to literally reach into our homeland through the internet, through social media. Catherine, welcome.
With exclusive access, Fox News went with Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson as federal government employees return to ground zero for the first time in 15 years and take up new workspace at One World Trade Center.
Oh, say, can you see?
The return marked by today's ceremony is deeply personal for those who lived through the attacks.
In some ways, it feels like victory, you know.
Goes to our resilience as Americans, as New Yorkers, as people of the free world, and we won't let somebody else dictate. dictate what we do.
The anniversary as well as the current threat are never far from anyone's mind.
Is there a specific or credible threat to the 15th anniversary?
We know of no specific credible threat around this 15th anniversary, but in this environment, it's important to frankly not get too hung up on that. When you're dealing with terrorist-inspired attacks, which could strike with little or no notice, the cop on the beat could be the one to detect the next terrorist attack on the U.S.
Are there plots that have been disrupted on your watch that the public is not aware of?
All the time, yes. We have prevented a number of actors from carrying out their intent at the very latest stages of their plotting and their planning.
Johnson says Tashfeen Malik and Omar Farouk, who gunned down 14 in San Bernardino, California, and Omar Mateen at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, are the new faces of a self-radicalized threat.
Can anything ever prepare you for the moment when a terrorist murders 49 people in a Florida nightclub?
No, nothing can prepare you for that moment, just like nothing could prepare anyone for a 9/11, for a San Bernardino.
What do we know about Omar Mateen today that we didn't know in June?
There were very definitely signs, and if people close to someone who carries out an act of terror can be encouraged to come forward and say something, that does make a difference.
On the debate over Syrian refugees coming to the U.S. and whether it will increase the risk, Johnson is guarded.
I don't comment on what the candidates say. To vilify and isolate American Muslim communities is very much counter to our Homeland Security, national security efforts. I was in my law office on
As the anniversary approaches, Johnson, who was practicing law in New York City on 9/11, says the attacks altered his focus, as it did for so many Americans.
It was a moment in my life when my brain did not believe what my eyes were seeing, and I kept thinking that out of the rubble and the smoke would emerge the towers, but it didn't happen, and it changed our nation and it changed our world.
And his department's message is one of resilience.
We are a strong, courageous, resilient nation, and so on this anniversary, it's important to remember and honor those who were killed, remember the heroes on that day, but it's also important to look forward.
In New York, Catherine Herridge, Fox News.
With the 9/11 anniversary coming Sunday, many who were in New York or Pennsylvania or at the Pentagon are reliving those terrifying moments. Tonight, senior correspondent Rick Leventhal focuses on some of the heroes.
When two hijacked planes hit the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001, thousands of people fled the burning and collapsing buildings in lower Manhattan.
Wait for the other guy.
And thousands of first responders raced into the smoke and flames. Firefighter Billy Quick was one of them.
I ran up to the building and a police officer said, I got people trapped down the subway. So I went into the subway, went downstairs, got people up. People are bleeding, screaming, crying. And I just said, just come upstairs, go to your left, just keep going to your left. Just find the ambulance, go to your left, go to your left. Within 2 to 3 minutes after that, the first collapse happened of the building.
Quick spent the next 60-plus days breathing toxic dust while working the pile in the massive rescue and recovery operation at Ground Zero until he blew out his knee, then developed serious lung problems. Quick died 5 years ago at age 55 from 9/11-related illness. One of 127 members of the department whose names have been added to the memorial at FDNY headquarters.
We were there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we're paying the price.
Daniel Nigro was promoted to chief of department on 9/11 when he escaped the collapse, but his boss did not. He says lessons have been learned, but the mission hasn't changed.
We are determined to do everything we can to protect life and property in this city.
We just looked up and a guy next to me says, that's going to hit the Trade Center. And it hits the Trade Center and it looked like you were in a movie. It looked like a horror movie.
We met John Millette minutes after the first tower fell, covered in its dust. He'd seen both planes hit and watched people trapped on high floors leap to their deaths. John still works in finance across the street from the Trade Center site, just as he did 15 years ago, and says he thinks about what happened here every day.
It changed me, and it makes me appreciate, the first responders, the military, the people that were down here, the iron workers, all those people and then people that rebuilt. And I think they did a great job, and hopefully, for the people that lost people that day, this is a beautiful place for them to come and go to and reflect.
Behind me, you can see the One World Trade Tower rising above lower Manhattan, a dramatic symbol of the recovery at ground zero and the resilience of this city and the nation, and a constant reminder of the tragedy that took place here 15 years ago. On Sunday, we will have the now traditional reading of the names of every single life lost on 9/11/2001, part of the healing process that will likely last our whole lives. Brett?
And I know you remember that well on the ground as well. Rick Leventhal, live in New York. Rick, thank you. We will have live coverage of the 9/11 moments of silence and other memorials throughout the day on Sunday with a special Sunday night. Tune into Fox News. Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, President Obama, breaking news about Syria, U.S. and Russia talks. We'll talk about one nominee, two presidents when the panel join me after the break. You're actually supposed to hear that soundbite. That was President Obama. And let's take a listen.
This is my last election. Yeah. And after my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah. And I transmit this information to Vladimir.
I wanted to present you with a little gift which represents what President Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying. And that is, we want to reset our relationship. We worked hard to get the right Russian word. Do you think we got it?
You did it wrong.
I got it wrong.
Well, as President Obama talking about working after the election, he'll have more flexibility, and Hillary Clinton on the reset button. Now, word from Geneva that Secretary Kerry is working closely with his counterpart Lavrov, and they've reached a deal on Syria that the U.S. and Russia can work together and strike ISIS forces on the ground in Syria. A ceasefire is set to start at sundown on Monday in Syria. This, of course, as Donald Trump is coming under increasing criticism for praising Vladimir Putin and talking about working with Russia on that front as well. Let's bring in our panel tonight. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Welcome Clarence Page, Chicago Tribune columnist and member of the Tribune editorial board. Lisa Booth, columnist with the Washington Examiner, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Listen, there's a lot of focus on and criticism about Donald Trump and what he's said about Putin. The reason we ran those other clips is that the administration obviously has had their own issues in dealing with the Russians.
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's important to note that what Donald Trump has said recently about Vladimir Putin, his sort of benefit of the doubt comments on Vladimir Putin are not new. I mean, this is something that we've seen from Donald Trump now over the course of several months. I remember an interview that he gave to Joe Scarborough in which he praised Vladimir Putin. Scarborough called him on his praise for Vladimir Putin, reminded Trump that Vladimir Putin routinely kills journalists, kills political opponents, and finally, after 3 questions, got Donald Trump to sort of back down of his praise. So I think it's untoward for the Republican nominee to be praising Vladimir Putin in this way. Having said that, if you look at the Obama administration's record with respect to Russia, I mean, you report on this new deal, this diplomatic breakthrough supposedly on Syria with Russia. It was just a couple of years ago that the Obama administration was promising that the United States and its international partners would isolate Russia because of its aggression in the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine. And those promises, those pledges from the Obama administration disappeared almost within weeks as the United States tried to forge diplomatic consensus on Syria. If you're not going to keep the promises, don't make the promises.
Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, I agree. It's a touchy situation for the Obama administration to be in, but Syria is a serious situation to the point that they've got to have Russia's cooperation in order to get any kind of progress over there. I'm surprised to hear about this breakthrough today. I hope it holds. But there are still questions about Trump's own relationship, financial relationships with Russian business people. His sons indicated they're rather extensive, and until Mr. Trump releases his income tax returns, we're not going to know just how extensive. But it makes me wonder, though, because he has a very, he really likes Putin a lot for a guy he's never actually talked to, as far as we know.
Lisa, what about Clinton's attacks on this front? Today she said she wasn't surprised that he was on Russian television, but disappointed that this is unseemly. And Judging by her past and the reset button and the administration's efforts, does this work for Clinton on this front?
Well, Hillary Clinton certainly has her own vulnerabilities in dealing with Russia. As you mentioned, the failed Russia reset, also the fact that Bill Clinton gave a speech in Russia not too long ago, got $500,000 from the speech and a personal thank you phone call from Vladimir Putin himself. So she has her own weaknesses in regards to Russia. That is why Donald Trump should not be giving interviews to Larry King and to Russia Today, because what it does is takes the focus away from Hillary Clinton and President Obama's failed policy, and it feeds this fodder that she's putting out about this close relationship between Putin and Trump. And so I think that's sort of a bad move on his behalf, because he's feeding the narrative, and it's not a narrative that he should be feeding.
Here is what Kellyanne Conway said this morning about this interview that ended up airing on RT, Russian television.
He actually did an interview with Larry King, a personal friend of his, a friend of, I'm sure, everyone around the table. And he said he was doing it for his podcast, didn't know it would be on Russian TV.
Larry King put out a statement late today saying that his company his show is produced and owned by Aura Media, and they're solely responsible for it. And RT, the Russian RT America, is one of several dozen companies licensed to run it. Still a problem for Trump? Charles?
Look, whether or not he knew where it was going to appear, I think is irrelevant. It's the content of what he said. Look, 4 years ago, the Republicans nominated, in a year when they should have run against Obamacare, would have been their strongest issue. They nominated the one guy in the country who couldn't bring it up because he created it in Massachusetts. This time, they have an opponent in Hillary who is clearly vulnerable on Russia. The reset was an embarrassment. It was clear at the beginning. It was hopelessly naive. The Russians would take advantage of it. Putin has played Obama like for a fool over the 4 years. Obama actually thinking even 4 years ago, as late as then, that he could deal with Putin, be a tough guy after he's reelected on every front. But the Republicans end up nominating the one guy who can't make this case because of his repeated expressed admiration for a guy who kills his political opponents, jails his opponents, the ones he doesn't kill, took over the press, controls it, and invades sovereign countries. And so we have an issue that is no longer an issue that can be used.
Meantime, North Korea tests what we believe to be its strongest nuclear weapon yet. I think we have a soundbite from Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump today on that issue. Maybe, maybe not. Some days you don't. Some days it all doesn't come together.
We like that. We like that.
Together.
Well,
but basically,
it was done in secret.
Yeah,
so,
it was done in secret. Basically, Trump says that this is the fourth of 5 nuclear tests, and 4 of them happened under Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. Thoughts about this and the seriousness of this issue?
Look, it's a very serious issue. I mean, we've seen North Korea with missile tests periodically over the past year, going back even further than that. But these nuclear tests are much more significant, obviously. And if you want to criticize the Obama administration, criticize that approach generally, you can point out that the same person, Wendy Sherman, who originally negotiated the agreed framework back in the 1990s under President Clinton, which Hillary Clinton embraced and has touted as a model for diplomacy, was also responsible for the Iran deal. This is what failed diplomacy looks like. And Donald Trump ought to be hitting this, I think, in every speech he gives, in every conversation he has from now until Election Day.
All right, panel, stand by. Next up, is Make America Great Again, that slogan, is it racist?
That message where I'll give you America Great Again is, if you're a white Southerner, you know exactly what it means, don't you? What it means is, I'll give you the economy you had 50 years ago, and I'll move you back up on the social totem pole and other people down.
Now you are being called upon, every one of you, to secure a better future for your children and your grandchildren and to make America great again.
I want to attack these problems and make America great again.
Former President Bill Clinton suggesting that Make America Great Again, Donald Trump's slogan, may somehow be racist in some way. And then obviously you saw the past times that he's used it in elections. We're back with the panel. Clarence, what What about that and the role of Bill Clinton here? I mean, if you look back to 2008, back in South Carolina, when he was getting so upset that he said that this was a race, that the Obama campaign was saying that he was somehow racist.
Right.
This is a full turnaround.
In all seriousness, Brett, ever since the beginning of Trump's campaign, I thought I'd heard that phrase, "Make America Great Again," somewhere before. I thought it was Reagan. It wasn't until today I realized it was Bill Clinton, and repeatedly, you know, and maybe his memory slipped too. I don't know.
But you know, on the stump, using what he used to say that. What do you think?
Well, you know, a lot of context matters, you know. Certainly when black folks hear "Let's Make America Great Again" coming from a white conservative, they think, which America are you talking about? I mean, my friend Pat Buchanan thinks America went downhill right after Elvis hit the Ed Sullivan Show, you know, back in '56. And this is the kind of thing that a lot of people think about. When Bill Clinton says, they say, oh, well, that's just Bubba, you know, he's just doing his Bubba thing. So I think context means a lot. But there is kind of a funny bit of coding going on here in the speeches, though, because Bill Clinton also knows how this message is received by black voters and a lot of liberals. So trying to have it both ways.
I mean, it's a big turnaround, Steve. I mean, it's you know, from where he was saying that he was being, you know, in a different spot in 2008.
Well, it's a big turnaround for Bill Clinton. It's not the first time for Bill Clinton. But, I mean, can we just say that "Make America Great Again" is not racist? I mean, there's nothing controversial about saying "Make America Great Again."
America's great already, Steve.
There's not code. There's nothing. I mean, people believe that the United States has slipped, that the United States is in decline over the past decade. I think it's fine to say "Make America Great Again." The fact that Donald Trump made that his campaign slogan, I think, is one of the smartest things that Donald Trump has said. And, look, there's plenty. If Bill Clinton wants to attack Donald Trump for making bigoted comments, there's actual stuff there. I mean, go back to the things that he said about the judge. Go back to the things that he said about Hispanic Americans. Don't invent something out of a campaign slogan where you say "Make America Great Again." You know, there's nothing there.
Lisa, Donald Trump is obviously reaching out to African-American communities. He had the event in Detroit, but you look at the latest Fox News poll and the general election preference among non-white voters. The Clinton-Kaine team, 72%, Trump-Pence at 21%. You look back at 2008 and 2012 for Barack Obama, the percentage of African-Americans, 95% and 93%. The question is whether Hillary Clinton is going to win that percentage among black voters and whether she's really just trying to gin up that base.
Well, and I think that does represent a problem for Hillary Clinton trying to rebuild the Obama coalition. African Americans, came out to support the first black president in 2008 and 2012 with President Obama. And I do think that represents a difficulty for her. I think it's even going to be difficult for her to reach the same amount of support with women voters as President Obama did. He was an inspiring candidate. She is not. And I think that level of enthusiasm is going to be a problem for her. But it really shouldn't surprise anyone for Bill Clinton to have this level of hypocrisy. Clearly, there's been a different set of rules with the Clintons in their mind and for everyone else as well. And there's also, if you go back to Bill Clinton, he had defended the late Senator Byrd's involvement with the KKK. So I think the Clinton family isn't necessarily clean on these issues, and it does represent an overreaching by Hillary Clinton and maybe a little desperation.
Someone we don't talk about on the campaign trail because he hasn't been there in a while is President Obama, but he will be back out there, and likely that's going to help the Clinton campaign and Hillary Clinton, especially in those communities.
Exactly. Look, I think her problem is not so much the percentage of African Americans she's going to get. It's going to be in the 90s. It'll be a question of a point here or there. It's the turnout. Obama was one of the things that made him president is that among minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, others, the turnout was higher than ever historically. And that had there been historic levels of turnout, he might not have won, especially in 2012. So, I mean, I think that's going to be her problem. And as to the slogan, you know, there are only so many slogans that you can have if you're the out party. One of them is to make the country great. Another, for example, is to take back our country. And I remember MSNBC, one of the anchors saying that in itself was racist. And they take it back.
Clarence, last word here. You know, 2008, Bill Clinton said they played the race card on me, talking about the Obama campaign.
Yeah, and people play it back and forth. A lot of folks back in '92 criticized Clinton for the execution that he had out in Arkansas. Ricky Ray Rector, I believe his name was, who was mentally incapacitated, and Bill Clinton executed him anyway, knowing he had to be a law and order candidate and all. So yeah, these things happen. Bill Clinton is a realist about these things, knows how to finesse them. Hillary is not nearly as skilled at finessing them, so it's going to be interesting to see how she handles it.
Clarence, thank you, panel. Thank you. Up next, your Friday feedback. Finally tonight, your Friday feedback. In our report on Donald Trump, we asked if you are comfortable with the presidential candidate praising Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Terry Mills at Ranger 2444 says Putin is a dictator and tyrant who longs for the good old USSR. You do not praise a tyrant who is a threat to world peace, naivete at best. Craig tweets, whatever helps our relations with Russia, I don't see it as praise, but a start. Pigger Valor says, I look at it like when Reagan reached out to Gorbachev. People didn't like that either. In our story about North Korean nuclear testing, we asked what the U.S. should do about the most recent test. Bill at Rapture Glory writes there is nothing America can do except military airstrikes, which it will not do. C. Ellen Runn says China should be engaged and asked to represent the rest of the world in leading pressure on North Korea. And in our piece about 9/11 first responders ahead of the 15th anniversary of the tragedy Sunday, we asked if you feel safer than you did 5 years ago. Sandy says yes. Logically, yes, but emotionally, no. Terror now random and can happen anytime, anywhere. Emily writes, not really. Safe has been redefined. And that's your Friday feedback. Please join me for a live special report Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 days a week for Special Report. That's this edition. Thanks for inviting us into your home. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. On the Record with Rick Hume starts right now.